George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
Springtime with Hitler in Canada. 2S LGBTQI plus campaigner and part-time Prime Minister of Canada goes double SS, orchestrating a tear-dropped standing ovation for a man who should have been in front of a firing squad at the end of the Second World War, a fugitive from the Eastern Holocaust, honoured by every single member of the Canadian Parliament, irrespective of which side of the Uni Party they belong to. And King Charles goes full Tonto in the Palace of Versailles. I wonder what the people outside would have made of him in 1789. And Donald Trump goes 10 points clear of Joe Biden in a CNN ABC poll for the presidential election coming up soon. It must be getting nearly time for them to decide either to throw in the towel of Joe Biden or to take another action to terminate Donald Trump, maybe with extreme prejudice. It's all coming up over the next 2 hours. Fasten your seatbelts. It's the mother of all talk shows.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
An inflection point has been reached in the proxy war between NATO and Russia over the dead bodies, hundreds of thousands of them, of the people of Ukraine. It's an inflection point on the battlefield, and I'll be talking to a very eminent former CIA operative about what was meant by the British and French cruise missile attack on the headquarters of the Russian Navy in Sebastopol and what Russia will be planning to do in return. But it's an inflection point on the political battlefield too. I honestly believe that when the history comes to be written, that the events in the Canadian Parliament, one of the so-called Five Eyes intelligence grouping, so no one can claim ignorance or stupidity, they are the smartest people in the world, are they not? The events in the Canadian Parliament, presaged actually, bookended by performances by high-heeled Jack, Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister sometimes of Canada, were of such importance, such a level of grotesque rewriting of history, worse even than von der Leyen's claim, implicit earlier in the week, that it was Russia that leveled Hiroshima and Nagasaki with nuclear weapons. Certainly she did not name those who had, but by implication, saying that Russia is threatening to do this again. It was easy for the simpleton, and there are some in the world today, mainly in parliaments, it would seem, but also in the general public, to infer that Russia was the power that used nuclear weapons in the past. But this took the biscuit in Canada's Parliament, House of Commons, it is called, modelled on the mothership of the British House of Commons. It was a sight so ugly, so literally unbelievable, that many people still are having difficulty coming to terms with it. 1 million Canadians fought Nazism in the Second World War, and for a country then of 11 million, that was pretty damn impressive recruiting, and they were all recruits there to fight Hitler in Europe of their own volition because they believed in it. 1 million Canadians out of 11 million. 100,000 Canadians were either killed or maimed fighting the Hitlerites on the European continent. That's 10% of all of their soldiers were casualties, dead or wounded. Again, a level of sacrifice, of volunteers, which is something to be proud of, something to enshrine in your heart, something to guide your every attitude into the future when dealing with great geopolitical issues. I've visited the Canadian war graves in Normandy. 14,000 Canadian soldiers landed on Juno Beach and faced, funnily enough, SS troops on Juno Beach, which accounted for the relatively savage level of casualties suffered by those with the bad luck to have landed on that particular beach. The SS took some of the Canadians prisoner on Juno Beach and tortured them to death, tortured them, and then, entirely in defiance of the laws of war, dispatched them with a firing squad. The SS were like that. I thought any schoolboy knoweth that, but not apparently the members of the House of Commons in Canada. Because this week, in a paroxysm of fervour, whipped up by the orchestrator, High-Heeled Jack, I call him High-Heeled Jack because he actually walked around in the Canadian Parliament in ladies' high-heeled shoes in a protest against violence against women. No, I don't know either. High-Heeled Jack had whipped the Canadian Parliament into a paroxysm of fervour for Zelensky and the Ukrainian cause. So much, no surprise. Trudeau has been in the vanguard of the war party since this whole affair began. Indeed, if you calibrate the levels of belligerence against both Russia and China, Canada is right there in the very... It's funny because no Canadian is going to go and fight Russia or China. It's funny because High-Heeled Jack would have absolutely no intention of putting on a tin hat himself or picking up a rifle himself. He's an effete popinjay, if you get my drift, at least according to his former missus. High-Heeled Jack is a frontline, backseat soldier of the Ukrainian cause. So it caused me no surprise that he was ranting and raving about the war. But what did take me by surprise, and will, I think, cost him dearly in political popularity in his own country, will cost the members of Parliament involved dearly. What will live on in history as a day of infamy in Canada was what happened next. In this paroxysm of fervour, the Speaker of the Canadian Parliament, no less, the Speaker reading from notes, drew attention to the presence in the audience of a Ukrainian hero, he said, a Canadian Ukrainian hero, he said, who had fought the Russians during World War II. Now, as they rose as one man and woman to applaud Yaroslav Hunka, aged 98, did the words "fought the Russians during World War II" not ring even the smallest of bells in the thickest of skulls amongst these maniacs on their feet, applauding with North Korean levels of vivacity this man who fought the Russians in World War II. Did it not occur to them that that meant he was a member of the Nazi army fighting the Russians during World War II? Did it not occur to them that they were on the same side as the Russians in World War II? That Canada, that Britain, that America and Russia were allies during World War II. So how can you feverishly applaud a man who the Speaker of the House introduces as someone who fought the Russians during World War II? Even if they didn't know that he was Yaroslav Hunka of the 14th Division of the same SS that murdered Canadian prisoners in the sand dunes on the beach of Juno in Normandy in 1945, even if they didn't realize that the Galician SS, of which Yaroslav was a member and from which is a fugitive from war crime charges, did it not occur to them that this man was therefore a part of war crimes almost beyond imagination? Not beyond mine, because I saw Einsatzgruppen, Hitler's Eastern Holocaust, on Netflix before they buried it so deeply that you'll be very lucky to find it on Netflix if you try to after this show. I saw what the Galician SS, of which Mr. Hunka was a member, I saw what they did. I saw the massacre. Hundreds and thousands of Jews, of Poles, of partisans, of Ukrainian citizens that would not collaborate with Hitler. I mean up close and personal. I mean murdering them in pits, on video, climbing on the bodies and murdering them. Anything that moved in the pit, murdered, executed. Who? Not by the Germans, but by their Ukrainian collaborators, their fellow members of Hitler's SS. So what do we have here? We have a Commonwealth Parliament. We have a North American state. We have a member of NATO. We have one of the Five Eyes. We have one of the leaders of the war party in the world, whose parliament orgiastically applauded in a standing ovation a member of Hitler's SS. And so every one of those liberals with a small l, every one of those liberals out there, if they still have the Ukrainian twibbon on their profiles, if they are still shilling for Zelensky and the regime in Kiev, I want you to think about what I have just said. And I want patriotic Canadians, I want the children and the grandchildren of the 100,000 dead and wounded Canadian soldiers who volunteered to fight Hitler in Europe, From 1939, not 1941, Uncle Sam, 1939 until 1945. I want every one of those children and grandchildren, and now great-grandchildren, of all those Canadian war graves in Normandy and elsewhere, of all those 1 million Canadians who went to fight Hitler. I want them to hold high-heeled Jack Trudeau to account. I want them to demand from their members of Parliament, why did you give a standing ovation? Because I saw you on television. Not a single member of Parliament did not get to their feet. I want all those Canadians to demand of their members of Parliament why they did this, why they desecrated the war graves of their own fathers and forefathers, why they licked the spittle of a Nazi war criminal, mass murderer, genocide enabler, Jew killer. I want every Canadian, every loyal, decent, patriotic Canadian to demand an explanation from their Prime Minister and the parliamentary acolytes on both sides of the House that committed this excrescence in Canada this week. Let me turn to King Charles in Versailles. King Charles, like high-heeled Jack Trudeau, is in the grip of a twin zealotry. He has other strings to his bow, but the main parts of this twin zealotry, held by Trudeau, by Sunak, by Starmer, by Macron, by Schultz, and by King Charles, are so-called climate change and war in the Ukraine. Now, these others that I mentioned are elected politicians and are therefore entitled to express their point of view, however awful it is. But you, Your Majesty, are elected by no one. You have no right at all, whether on foreign soil or domestic, to be weighing in with your heavy and expensive royal crown on matters of political controversy which divide your people, your subjects, as you like to call them. Many of your subjects think that this net zero lark is a hoax, is a con. In fact, so strong is that feeling in the country that little Rishi Sunak has begun to beat a path to the policy first enunciated by the Workers' Party of Britain, which I lead. He has U-turned, rode back on the crazy commitments to net zero cold and penury for the British people by 2030. And if I'm any judge, he's going to make these matters an election issue in the general election he's going to call next May, on the same day as the local elections. Write it down, mark my words. So this matter of national controversy, King Charles, is not one into which you can venture. At least not if you're a constitutional monarch. And if you're not, Versailles was a pretty risky place to venture forth on the divine right of kings. And many of your subjects do not share your declaration that Ukraine stands for the same values as us. Because, frankly, sire, they do not. Not the Ukrainian war criminal in the Canadian Parliament, not the Ukrainian midget running around in his fatigues from one parliament to the next, filling his bag of money from the taxpayers in all countries. Not the Azov battalion, not those erecting statues to Bandera, the leader of the Hitlerites in the territories occupied by the Nazis in the Second World War. No, sire. My grandfathers fought in your grandfather's army, all the way from El Alamein to Monte Cassino and beyond, against those values, against the values held so dear by that regime in Kiev. Fasten your seatbelts. This is going to be a bumpy night. It's the mother of all talk shows. I defy anyone to contradict the point that I just made, that every person alive today was born of woman. So why would we say that the people in the labor wards, in the maternity units, are people who are giving birth? Why can't we say women? Why can't we say mothers? Why can't we say women who are breastfeeding, mothers who are breastfeeding? Why do we need to say people who are chest feeding? All of these words, and indeed all of the trend that you say you dissociate yourself from, of transgenderism, transmania, I call it, are all taking rights away from women.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Now, we've got an unlikely poll running. Perhaps it should have said if you had to. If they ran for president and you had to vote for one of them, who would you vote for? Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, or Bill Gates? Poor Bill. Poor Bill. 14,449 people have already voted. Elon Musk wins absolutely a landslide victory so far. On Telegram, 97% for Elon Musk, 2% for Mark Zuckerberg, and 1% for Bill Gates. On Twitter, 88% for Elon Musk, 4% for Mark Zuckerberg, 8% for Bill Gates. He's rather more popular on Twitter. Well, rather more. 8%, better than 1. And on the YouTube community poll, 92% Elon Musk, 2% Zuckerberg, 6% Bill Gates. And on the YouTube stream, it's 94% Elon Musk, 3% Zuckerberg, and 3% Bill Gates. Here are the numbers if you want to call the show. If you're in the UK or Ireland, it's 08081 965522. That's 08081 965522. If you're in the US or Canada, it's +1 844 944 3344. That's +1 844 944 3344. And it's toll free. If you're in the rest of the world, the number is 44203 966 2625. Now, my first guest is a very eminent one indeed. He has a very big following because, well, frankly, he knows what he's talking about. As well, he should. He's a former CIA operations officer. in both Europe and the Middle East. Maybe he spied on me once upon a time. Who knows? He's a war veteran and a PhD in European history. Nowadays, he's a go-to for anyone who wants to understand what's really going on. And I'm glad Philip Giraldi is with us now on the mother of all talk shows. Philip, I can't tell you how glad I am to see you. I've wanted you on the show for a very long time. But before we go into the broader battlefield, I don't know if you heard my monologue, but isn't it emblematic that the Canadian Parliament gave a prolonged and rapturous standing ovation to a fugitive from the Waffen SS involved in Hitler's Eastern Holocaust in the Canadian Parliament this week? Is this not the apogee or the nadir, the high point or the very bottom of the peculiar position countries like Canada have taken on this war?
Well, I think in reality, it's demonstrating exactly how this war is not anything like the conventional wars that we've known in the past. This is something that is a political war. It's being fought for political reasons. There were no reasons that motivated the Russians to invade that could not have been resolved through negotiations. But the British government and the American government, Canadian government, all had a hand in making sure that that did not happen. So this is a political exchange, which is becoming more aggravated, I would say, by the failure of the Ukrainians to very effectively oppose the Russians, and also by the fact that there is an election coming up in the United States in a year's time. And Biden is playing this game of wanting to come out in a year as something like a war hero. And this, of course, is ridiculous. And he's going to kill another 500,000 people in the process.
Yeah, I'm always after the fool or knave answer. These Western countries who pushed Ukraine into this conflict, as you and I both agree, did they know it would all end up as badly as it has, that the Russian economy would be outperforming the German economy and so on, that the Ukrainian armed forces, no matter how much materiel is stuffed into their ranks, are simply not going to be able to achieve the war aims stated by the Allies and by Ukraine repeatedly? So did they know that, in which case they're knaves, or did they imagine it was going to end up differently, in which case they're fools?
Well, I think they imagined it would end up differently. I think that's the way to look at it. They really thought that the sanctions and other financial and economic pressures they were putting on Russia would be enough to make Russia, if not fold, at least think twice about what it was doing. But it's had the reverse effect, which is basically the Western economies have been hurt by this, and Russia has come out on top. So that did not work out very well. And I think they also believed the propaganda that they were feeding themselves about how the Russian army was full of soldiers who didn't want to fight, that was poorly trained, poorly equipped. In other words, they were seeing Ukraine as a much more formidable opponent of Russia than actually turned out to be the case. The Russian army has performed very effectively, and it's the poor Ukrainians that have been getting caught between a rock and a hard place due to the policies that NATO and the U.S. And others have been pushing them into, and all they've been looking at is defeat. And the war in terms of military is a foregone conclusion now. There is no way, even if NATO were to intervene more aggressively, no way this thing is going to get turned around.
More and more people are saying that, Philip, even in the House journals of the War Party, in the New York Times, in the Washington Post, in the London Times, in the Daily Telegraph here, in, if you like, the fancy newspapers and the so-called flagship broadcasters that are talking to, if you like, the elites in our society, are all now openly saying this is not going to end well. Down at the popular end, in the yellow press and so on, you still get the Ukraine is winning propaganda, because that's for the masses. But you and I know, and they know, the top people know, this is not going to end well. Why then indulge in these performative public relations exercises, like firing long-range cruise missiles into the Navy headquarters in Sebastopol, which will of course change nothing, but allows a bit of a thrill to run through the ranks of the scribblers, but can only make the final terms of the settlement, and settlement there will presumably have to be, all the more onerous for Ukraine and its backers.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. This is where it's going. And again, I think you have to look at it right now in terms of this is a game that's being played. And essentially, people like Joe Biden are wanting to come out with an acceptable solution at the end of all of this, where Mr. Joe Biden gets reelected president of the United States, and so on and so forth. But I think he's going to have a rough ride. The meetings at the UN in this past week were not a good sign. The reception of Zelensky's speech and of Biden's speech, Zelensky's speech, there was virtually no one there listening. So he's lost whatever charisma he had. And we have Joe Biden's speech, which just basically said nothing. So you have essentially the world is starting to wake up to what's going on here. And Biden is essentially trying to ride the horse so he gets out at the other end with some kind of solution that will work for him. And this is not going to happen. Senator Rand Paul today announced that he is going to do everything in his power, which is considerable, to make sure that this upcoming tranche of money of $43 billion that was supposed to go to Ukraine will get blocked. So we'll see how that works out.
And the War Party just lost another paragon of virtue. Presumably, Senator Bob Menendez will not be showing up to vote for more war, weighed down as he is by all the money in his jacket and the gold bars in the backseat of his car. So the arithmetic in the Senate is getting more and more tight. Menendez is only, of course, the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee in the United States of America. You couldn't make this up. So it's getting tight for them financially on the battlefield in Congress. And yet, Mitch McConnell, when he's sentient, he's still glued to President Biden. Is this a kind of octogenarian love affair, or what is it that first attracted McConnell to Joe Biden?
Well, I think that the thing that's attracted the two of them to each other is the fact that they've hit their heads so many times lately in falling down that they have something in common there. But reading between the lines on the meetings that Zelensky had in Washington, there was no warmth there. The last time he came through Washington, he received a hero's welcome, standing ovations in Congress. People were talking about putting a bronze bust of him under the Capitol dome. And this time it was kind of quiet. McCarthy, for example, did not meet him when he arrived. He met the two leaders of the Senate, Republican and Democrat. But again, there was not enthusiasm about all this. And there were some other interesting signs that preceded this. There was an article in the New York Times when Zelensky arrived describing how an alleged Russian terrorist attack on a Ukrainian village back on June 6th, which Zelensky claimed was a Russian terrorist attack, turned out, in fact, to be an attack using a Ukrainian missile. So this is very reminiscent of the Polish incident back in April, when they claimed that Poland had been attacked by the Russians. It turned out it had been the Ukrainians. Zelensky is losing all his credibility, is what I'm saying. And the surfacing of this article when he arrived in the United States was probably a leak from the White House sending a signal.
Yeah, as they used to say in music hall, he was a good act, but he's gone on too long. I think there's little doubt that he's going to be hooked off the stage one way or another. But looking at that CNN ABC poll today, putting President Trump 10 points ahead, in other words, and that's before you even factor in that RFKJr might well run as an independent, taking a significant number of votes off the Joe Biden column. It's beginning to look like a big change is coming in Washington. And does that not concentrate the minds of the CIA, the FBI, the agencies and so on? Do they not have to now start thinking, well, look, we could be under new management next year?
Yeah, that's exactly what they're thinking. And that's what I'm hearing from former colleagues in the national security realm. They're quite nervous about what's coming up. They know they have essentially sold their souls over the last 8 or 10 years. And, there's going to be a comeuppance for all of this. The public in the United States is very aware of how corrupted the institutions of government have become. And there could be some real surprises in this election. I would love to see a ticket composed of Kennedy and someone else who is as strong on the anti-war position as he is, Tulsi Gabbard. I would love to see that.
That would be a wonderful ticket indeed. Now, you served, shall I say served, in Europe for the CIA. I'm not going to ask you to tell me what you were doing during those times. You could tell me off air anytime that you like. But with your knowledge of Europe, are you surprised at how tamely the European leadership has gone into this abattoir, which has effectively sacrificed their own economies? Is that the Europe that you used to know, or has something changed?
I am surprised by it, and I was in Europe quite recently, Eastern Europe, and I was surprised by some of the conversations I had there. I would think that the corruption we're seeing in the United States, pervasive corruption of the political system, is also taking place in Europe. There's a lot of criticism of the leadership, or certainly over the last 5 or 6 years. And I think this criticism is rooted in what voters are seeing. And then for me, I mean, the bottom line, I will tell you honestly, I worked in counterterrorism the whole time I was in Europe and the Middle East, which I was comfortable with. And the thing is, Europeans should be thinking back on the horrors of the Second World War. And they should, the slogan "never again" should apply to that. And the fact that their leadership is jumping into this is just, to me, astonishing, and trying to justify why they're doing this. The arguments about, well, this is to protect democracy and things like that. This is all nonsense. Excuse me. So I'm astonished by it, but I think the people are turning against it, and people like you and your party. I think that the signal is coming through loud and clear that we are on a wrong course, and hopefully there will be a readjustment. And when the readjustment comes, it will be a serious one.
God willing. Philip Giraldi, thank you for joining us on the Mother of All Talk Shows. I hope you'll come back and talk to us again. Very much obliged to you. Philip Giraldi, formerly of the CIA. Later, in the second hour, we've got Professor George Szamuely, one of the most clever and sagacious of commentators. He's coming up in the second hour, so don't miss that. How's the poll going? 15,372 people have voted. I said this would get 20, but it's not yet there. But Elon Musk's lead has not shrunk. 97, 88, 92, and 93 for Elon Musk. Mark Zuckerberg, 2, 4, 2, 3. Poor Bill Gates, 1, 8, 6, 4. My goodness. I'll be right back after this short break. Stay tuned. Let's hear from Mehdi. Go ahead, sir.
Hello, George. Thank you very much for taking my call. This is such an honor, because one thing I want to tell you is in 2003, I thought that I'll say it, I thought you were a prattling liberal idiot. 20 years later, I'm here honored to speak to you, to say live on air, I'm sorry, I should have listened to you back then. You're bringing the truth to what's going on out there. And one of the things is U.S. policy, whatever it is now, is our government. The problem is that it's run by people with absolutely no honor. They have no shame in what they will do to accomplish what they want. And I really think part of what's going on, that's driving what's going on in Ukraine, is that it's the possibility of all the corruption that it will uncover that has happened there with the influence of our country and NATO since 2014.
Yeah. You spoke extremely powerfully and very graciously, and I'm grateful for it. But you put your finger on, I think, something that's been in the back of my mind for a while. I grew up in a time, indeed I sat in Parliament for almost 30 years, during a time when there were certain standards. There were double standards, of course, and there was a great deal of hypocrisy. But the ruling elite had standards that they tried to keep up. Nowadays, that facade has been torn asunder. Now they're not even pretending to be honorable gentlemen and ladies. Now they're no longer pretending that their institutions, their great departments and ministries are in anything to do with contemporary politics other than an arm of the ruling party. My last word, Mehdi. I ain't no liberal, bruv. I wasn't back in 2003, and I ain't any more liberal today.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Email from Tony. Hi, George. Canada voted for Justine, and now they face ridicule daily. Apparently, Nazis aren't so bad after all. Welcome to the lunatic asylum. Thanks, Tony. Let's go to the lines. Canada, of course, up first. Kevin in Ontario. Kevin, welcome to the show. What would you like to say?
Oh, thank you, George. I want to thank you again for today's monologue. What it brought to my attention, to my disgust and attention, is that our government has become a, how would I put it, a circus of fools, people who are not even bright enough to do their homework, to sit there to clap and to praise an SS officer. I think maybe Miss Freeland must have brought him in. But that being said, I find that Canada is going down.
Her father was her father or grandfather was the editor of a Nazi newspaper in German-occupied Ukraine, and now she's the second honcho in the Canadian political circus.
I agree. And I think there's something mentally wrong with this person. I've watched her on television, and if you look closely, that woman I don't think is well. And you're right, she's got too much power. And that, how do you call him, High Heel Jack, he is following her advice. These people have lost all their marbles.
Although, there's something wrong with him. There's a want about him. I've always thought that from the days that he used to paint up in blackface to his days cross-dressing in women's clothes. He's unstable, High Heel Jack. He's not on the level, as Confucius would say. And yet the Canadians backed him, voted for him. How did that happen, Kevin?
Well, it's not only that. You're right. There's real problems in our political system. But when the NDP jumped in to save his government, the NDP did it in order to bring in a few changes to legislation, which is fine. But to sit back, the NDP as a party, to sit back and watch what this man is doing into the whole country is I don't know who to vote for next. It's at that point.
No, it's a desperate situation, and you are right to allay any misconception. This atrocity against Canada's history, this desecration of the memory of the Canadian warriors who fought Hitler, and many of them lying in the ground in Europe. This crime was committed by all of the Canadian members of Parliament, all of them. Conservatives, Liberals, and so-called socialists in the NDP. Every single one of them, not one demurred. Whether they'll still be standing firm by the end of the week may in part depend how widely my monologue gets heard. Thanks, Kevin. The phone numbers I'm told to give you again, UK and Ireland, free of charge, remember, 08 081 96 5522, and in the US and Canada, +1 844 944 3344, and in the rest of the world, 44203 966 2625. Now, so many comments, and I'm grateful for all the kind words from viewers. I've just been looking at some of them. C in the Sky says, I'm an angry, ashamed Canadian. And Dante Alighieri says, I cannot believe the Canadian Parliament gave a standing ovation to an SS veteran. What is happening? And Catherine Chang Barker said, George, we Canadians don't see the Canadian news anymore. Parliament shut down news on social media. It is outrageous. Well, if true, that is indeed probably unique. Tanvir Aslam says, I feel sick today after seeing the Canadian Parliament applauding a Nazi. Why? Says Tanvir. Another Canadian call. John in Ontario is on the line from Canada. Let's hear from John. Go ahead, John.
Mr. Galloway, sir, what a pleasure it is to hear your voice and to be able to speak on your show. Thank you for the years that you've spent speaking truth to power.
Thank you, sir.
My father was a member of the Canadian Essex Scottish Division, the 2nd Canadian Division. His regiment had the highest casualty rate of any Canadian infantry regiment in the Second World War. He fought the Waffen-SS in Normandy. He fought Kurt Meyer's 12th SS Hitlerjugend Division at the Battle of Verrières Ridge. He and his friends were dying with their bolt-action Lee-Enfield rifles in a wheat field at the base of that ridge. And Meyer and Sepp Dietrich in the 1st SS Armored Division, the 12th and the 1st, were on the top of the ridge with their Panthers and their Stugs and their Tiger tanks. My father fought. He was wounded on that day, the 21st of July, 1944, at Verrières Ridge. Several of his best friends were killed for machine gun and mortar fire at the base of that ridge on that day. The intelligence officer for the regiment, the Essex Scottish, went on to have a combat command for one day because the officer corps was so depleted by the time they got to the Rhineland in the early spring of 1945. He had a combat command for one day, and he won the Victoria Cross. He was one of 16 Canadians who received the VC in the Second World War. This was the intelligence officer for my father's regiment. George, I'm outraged that this is going on in my country. Canada's not perfect, but I mean, normally, frequently, in any number of international studies, it's quoted as being one of the 4 or 5 best countries of the world in which to live in. And I used to believe that, and I was always proud to be a Canadian. Again, with all the limitations that exist in any modern social democracy. But this is the first time I can ever say, with real honesty and from the bottom of a heavy heart, that I feel ashamed to be a member of my own country. This war in Ukraine it's the most ridiculous, talking about going through the dark side of the mirror, down the rabbit hole, ever been. In a world, George, where most people don't read a single series book in a calendar year, we have a comic book war. We have a Manichaean war of evil versus good, darkness versus light, where the Ukrainians have been made up into these superheroes representing shining beacons of democracy and freedom, which is completely and utterly untrue for anyone who knows anything about the Kiev regime and the many ways in which it's anything but democratic, and the way the Russians, I've never seen this level of Russia-phobia ever. As Noam Chomsky has said recently, it's as if the Cold War has never ended.
Well, I must say, John, that was a humbling and powerful call, and the heaviness of your heart was evident in it. I don't think you'll be alone tonight in feeling a sense of shame, but it is important that that sense of shame is quickly replaced by a sense of anger, righteous anger. Because the war graves of Canadian soldiers, like your dear father and his comrades in arms, the war graves are crying out tonight for accountability and justice for this crime that was committed against their memory, against their sacrifice by their own parliament just this very week. So better than shame is anger and determination to hold this to account, to use it as a turning point, an inflection point at which the sensible majority who know that they're being lied to begins more and more effectively to fight back. I've told this story before, but 20 minutes from my house in Scotland, there's a prisoner of war camp from the Second World War, and the sign is still there. And the sign says, Ukrainian prisoners of war camp. It's now being put to good use, the collection of buildings, but the sign is still there. But no one No one is putting two and two together. If they were Ukrainian prisoners of war in Scotland, that means because they were fighting against us. That means they were fighting for Hitler. And yet, thousands, nearly 10,000 of these were allowed to settle in Britain at the end of the Second World War. And many of them emigrated to Canada. Ukrainians make up 5% of the Canadian population. That partly explains High-Heeled Jack's love affair with Zelensky, though, trust me, not entirely. But it's one thing supporting Zelensky, one thing supporting Ukraine in this conflict. But when your fervor reaches such a pitch that you end up on your feet ovating for Hitler's murderers in the Eastern Holocaust just because they're Ukrainians that hate Russians, then you seriously have gone down that rabbit hole, and you better get out of that rabbit hole pretty damn quick. EM says, what an insult to people such as this man speaking, his relatives, that Canada applauded Zelensky and Trudeau led the ovation for a Waffen SS veteran in Canada's parliament. And World War II daughter, 7, said, brought me to angry tears, considering my father's sacrifice during World War II, fighting alongside our brothers, the Russians. And White Rose says, why did my family on both sides fight against Nazis? Why, if we are now embracing Hitler regime, relatives and members of what is happening, why did they fight against them? Why forget? Here's another Canadian call, this time from Edmonton, from Federico. Federico, welcome.
Hello, George. Regarding your poll, George,
Hi.
Elon Musk, Bill Gates, or Zuckerberg, I think they already have representative with Ben Shapiro. I think he's going to run for president, if not on this one, on the next elections. They all will be represented there. But, well, Elon Musk, of course, will have 92% in your poll, so he will be the winner. But like I said, Ben Shapiro will represent all of them. Okay, I wanted to mention something, George, about what happened in Canada. It's just crazy. It's unacceptable. But it's not the last of the bad news we have here. The Ministry of Health now is imposing mandates again, and apparently it's going to be, for this new season, a new mandate. You have to wear masks and get vaccinated again, even though Canadian scientists have said again and again that it has not been proven to stop the spread of the disease. But on the Parliament, yeah, it's unacceptable. This is not the first reason that the Liberal Party, and I don't know if the Conservative Party will do any different. I think they protect the same interests in the end. So Canada is on a crossroad right now with 0 candidates for the next federal election, and that is very dangerous to Canada, seeing how the liberties and freedoms have been taken off Canadians' charters of rights and freedoms is very dangerous. But I would like to also mention the United Nations intervention of the Colombian president, and I think that is ironic because the president of a Central and South American country which has been abused and super abused, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, Colombia, for the last 100 years, is the one leading the flag of freedom and liberty and understanding, saying for the first time in 500 years, no to the Americans, imperialists, and British and other empires that are working their path in Africa and many other countries. And like I asked Jeffrey Sachs and also a running president for the United States, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., what will be their politics on Central and South America now that they're losing grip on the BRICS plus reunions, meetings, and power, economic power? What will that be their approach? Will they imply again the John F. Kennedy politics of the enemy within? The School of the Americas will take place because they're planning soft coups now in Central and South America, for example, in Brazil and in Colombia, and that in the United Nations was a good example of how Central and South America, before slave countries, are leading up the flags for Europe nowadays. What an irony that is. And I have never seen Europe so submitted to the will and caprice of irresponsible politicians like here in Canada. Much to talk about this, George, much to say. And just to finish here, the Million March for the imposition also in the education system for 4 to 11 years old to see the shows of transvestites was a march that we concurred all around Canada just last week on Wednesday, and with magnificent results. But the mainstream media here in Canada is supporting the direction of the Prime Minister. The mainstream media is supporting the direction of the education here. And we have to remember that those who make peaceful revolutions impossible only make violent revolutions inevitable. And I think that's the only path we're looking at here for Canada.
That's a quote from President Kennedy, of course, we should quickly add. President Kennedy said, those who make peaceful change impossible make violent change inevitable. And President Kennedy was right about that. I salute the march of those parents who, like me, are horrified at the danger of what's being force-fed to our children, especially our primary school children. And if I had been in Canada, I would have been on that march, as I would have been on those trucks of the Canadian truckers. But isn't it ironic that they called the Canadian truckers Nazis, whilst they gave a tear-flecked standing ovation to an actual Nazi war criminal in their parliament this week? Professor George Szamuely will be up after the break talking all things Europe and war. Stay tuned. I promise you, you don't want to miss it. Do you know how many people watch MSNBC? If this was a normal business, it would be out of business long ago. Do you know how many people watch CNN? We are in danger of fixating too much on the liberal hegemony of media outlets with infinitesimally small viewership. This show that you are watching has 10 times the viewership, 10 times the viewership of Rupert Murdoch's Talk TV with its budget of billions. So, let's not lose hope. Let's be our own media. You're right, not everybody watches me, watches those other people that you watch. Well, it's your job, and it's everybody else's job that's watching this and agrees with me this evening. It's your job to tell as many other people as you possibly can what we are all about, how to find us, encourage them, and check up afterwards whether they took your advice, and if they didn't, encourage them all over again. Have you any idea how we would multiply if everybody watching this did that? The best part of 2 million people will watch this program over the next 7 days. If those nearly 2 million spoke to one other person, we'd be 3 million if their advice was taken. And so on, and exponentially on, it is possible to go. It's in our hands. Let's do it. I can't do much more than what I'm doing. I need you, the audience, to spread the word.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
16,000 votes in now. If they ran for president, who would you vote for? If these were the only three on the ballot, of course, Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, or Bill Gates. 16,000 people have voted. Over 90% of them choose Elon Musk. I know he's not eligible to stand, but it's only an indicative poll. It's not, of course, the real thing. But the big standout is Bill Gates. On Telegram, he got 1% of the vote. Here's an email from Martin. George, I'm sorry, but my view of this conflict is morbid. I can now almost guarantee that we will have a nuclear war with Russia. Why? Because the leaders of NATO know that if they carry on arming Ukraine and lose, there will be no Western world anymore. NATO has spent the last 70 years with the mindset of being invincible, and I am 100% sure they won't give this up, as Ukraine will be a dead state. So will it be Russia or NATO to take this? Wow. That's from Martin Taylor. Back to the lines while we wait for Professor George. Eve is in Florida on China. That's what we call a global university of the airwaves. Eve, welcome.
Yes, I wanted, first of all, thank you for exposing the Nazi problem of Canada. It was long overdue in your monologue. So, what I wanted to say is that a few years ago, the President Xi, I think in Kazakhstan, introduced the Silk Road, and he said that the best investment that China could make is to develop the infrastructure of poor country, so the poor country could buy the Chinese good and the China could extract the raw material that they need, and he calls that a positive sum game, that everybody wins. And Mitch McConnell, a few months ago, he exposed the best investment in his mind of the Americans. And the best investment for him is to arm Ukraine to the teeth to kill as many Russians as possible without having to involve the American soldiers. So that shows two kinds of best investment for two different countries. Now the problem is that the war is not going too well, and that it doesn't look good for the military industrial complex to see those Challenger, Abrams tanks for tomorrow, Leopards and so on burning. So they want a freeze. So my question to you is, when you think that your best investment is to kill Russians, and when you know that the war in Ukraine is about the security of Russia, Russia was not happy to have missile 5 minutes away from Moscow, what is the chance that Russia accept the nuclear freeze, knowing that the best investment for the Americans is to kill as many Russians as possible?
Well, we'll hear from Professor George for a second opinion, but here's my opinion. Russia will not agree to freeze the war. There'll be no North and South Korea type permanent no war, no peace in Ukraine. I think that Russia will liberate all of the Russian-speaking areas of eastern and southern Ukraine, including all of the seaboard, necessary to link up with Transnistria and the ethnically Russian people there who are marooned in hostile territory, and will ensure that the remaining rump state of Ukraine is, to mix a geographical metaphor, is Finlandized, a term we used to use during the Cold War. Only a tame regime will be permitted in Kiev, with friendly relations to Moscow and absolutely no presence of either the European Union or NATO in the western part of Ukraine. In those circumstances, I personally fully expect Poland to take their part of western Ukraine that they have never accepted was taken out of Poland in the first place, particularly the great Polish city of Lvov or Lviv. So thanks very much for that call, Eve. Let me remind you of the numbers. UK and Ireland, 08081 965522. US and Canada, +1 844 944 3344. And rest of the world, 44203 966 2625. An email from SOR, S-O-R-R. Read the poll. Musk, Zuckerberg, Gates, none of the above. How about George Galloway? I'm far too young to run for President of the United States. Rob is on the line from Boston on Ukraine. Go ahead, Rob. What do you want to say?
Oh, hi, George. Yeah, just, I don't know if you noticed this a news item from RT, and I think it was reported also in Hindustan Times and other news outlets, that the Russians destroyed a Leopard tank on the battlefront. I think it was a day or two ago. Mm-hmm. And manning it was a German Bundeswehr crew, so it's just kind of a Twilight Zone world. So I thought I'd just mention that. That's all I had to say, really.
Yeah, and well, they say that it was a German crew on board the German tank, which was taken out. And one of the German soldiers, if they be German soldiers, survived. And presumably when he is fit enough to do so, will tell all about how come in the middle of a war, a group of German soldiers, not mercenaries, German army soldiers, turned up in a tank in Ukraine. German soldiers in panzers in Ukraine. What could possibly go wrong? Thanks, Rob, for that call. John says, you've had a couple of videos to the left of the screen of Trudeau ranting and raving. If you were to put a Hitlerite mustache on him, I would see no difference from Adolf himself. John in Ireland. I must say that particular video that's on the screen now is enough to chill the blood. YouTube comments. Mehdi says most of the 14th Galicia were sent to Canada, USA, UK. These were the Ukrainians that even the Nazi SS said was way too eager for the task, so to speak. Please watch Einsatzgruppen, Hitler's War in the East. Please watch it. They've hidden it on Netflix because, of course, it is utterly damning of the people who now run the regime in Kiev. Utterly damning beyond words. Damning. I mean, literally damning. Damning to hell and the hellfires damning. That's why it's so hard to find on Netflix. YouTube comments. Keith Mitchell says the memory hole is very active in Canada if they do not know who was fighting Russia during World War II. Tragic, if not hilarious. And my good friend Phil Kelly in Ireland put it peerlessly. I'm sorry if it hurts. He said Canada is a circus of liberals and the big top is erected over the bones of the Native American people whom they eliminated, annihilated, much like the annihilation of Jews and other so-called Untermensch in Hitler's Holocaust. Do you know that 100 million original inhabitants of the Americas from Canada to Chile were massacred by the successive waves of European colonial power. 100 million original inhabitants. Wow, that's some circus. A circus of liberals erected over the bones of the original people of North America. Powerful and true. Sver Mortveit says, how can Zelensky applaud an SS officer when his grandfather won 2 Red Stars fighting in the Red Army against the SS? This is sick clown circus. And Joseph Ball says the caption describing the SS man Yaroslav Honka being applauded in the Canadian Parliament has mysteriously disappeared from Associated Press, but is available on the Toronto Star website. I think there'll be a few people running for cover right now, especially when the video of the mother of all talk shows starts circulating. Email from Julian. George, I'm 58. My father would have been 101 years old this year. He fought fascism in World War II in Myanmar. I'm appalled at Canada's submission to Nazism. Are the globalists just flaunting this nowadays? CF NATO Nazi heads until the mid-60s, 70s. No to fascism. And of course, free Assange. Best wishes to you and the audience. Signed, Julian. On the line from Seattle is Nathan, who wants to talk about billionaires. Do you mean our poll, Nathan?
Well, I've expressed some of my hatred towards the concept of a billionaire to you, but you know, like America was discovered when your government sent a group of slave traders and just violent thieves over to steal land, and then our government broke off when the richest slave traders decided they were bigger. They didn't need your government, and there was a revolution. And it's just like right now, it's just like these billionaires. Yes, there's like little tiffs with the billionaires and the government that funds them. You know, like with Elon Musk, that's why he's winning the poll, because it's like, oh, he's willing to stop World War III. Like, do you want a cookie? Are we going to depend on people like this to decide if we survive as a species or not? So it's just
Nathan, that is brilliant. No, that is a brilliant observation. Great, good old Elon. He's going to stop World War III. The other two are going to start it. Nathan, wonderful call. Don't be a stranger. An email from John. Dear George, Philip Giraldi, Douglas McGregor, Tony Schaefer, these are outstanding guests who have direct information on the ground in the Ukraine front and with intelligence sources throughout the world. Thank you so much for having them and educating us. John, now in Hong Kong. Thanks, John. I agree with you. You get a better class of guest on the mother of all talk shows, and you get a monologue thrown in. What's not to love? Now, in some important Patreon news, you know, I keep telling you that I really depend on your support on Patreon, patreon.com/George Galloway. I mean, I really do. And it will cost you the price of a cup of tea per week. Am I worth a cup of tea per week? Well, if you think so, please support me on Patreon. And in fact, in the last 30 days, we've had 116 new patrons. So my calls for you to join and the free films like Killing Kelly that you get when you sign up have been successful. Some great Patreon comments now. A legend, a MOATS legend, Graham Briggs White, says, I wouldn't trust any of them, talking about the poll, as they're part of the military-industrial complex. But at least Elon puts himself out on a limb. That's true, Graham, and must account for his landslide victory in our poll. Emias A. Abebe says, only by lesser of the other evils rule. The 1% are not going to save this world unless a person with a public servant mentality arrives in the political arena. At the moment, RFKJr is the only one close to that. And Leslie Hope says, we don't need a billionaire president. We need an anti-billionaire. Where are the counterparts of Hugo Chavez, Evo Morales, Rafael Correa, and Daniel Ortega? I'm not sure how well they'd fare at this moment in time in a presidential election in the United States. Boca Foltersma says, George, I'm able to support you and your important show finally. Please keep up the good work. The world needs it now more than ever. Best regards. And to you, Boca. So please go to patreon.com/George Galloway. Sign up for the cost of a cup of tea per week. I have to keep making that point. Coming up after this short break is Professor George Szamuely, Senior Research Fellow at the Global Policy Institute and author of Bombs for Peace, NATO's humanitarian war on Yugoslavia, where it's all cooking up again. We'll be talking to George right after this short break. I defy anyone to contradict the point that I just made, that every person alive today was born of woman. So why would we say that the people in the labor wards, in the maternity units, are people who are giving birth? Why can't we say women? Why can't we say mothers? Why can't we say women who are breastfeeding, mothers who are breastfeeding? Why do we need to say people who are chest feeding? All of these words, and indeed all of the trend that you say you dissociate yourself from, of transgenderism, transmania, I call it, are all taking rights away from women.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
My grandson, Sean, who helps me on this show, sends me this. He's a student at the School of Oriental and African Studies, which is an institution of some note, an institution that many successful and indeed famous, prominent people have gone to. It used to be a place I used to speak at regularly. I was very impressed by it. And when my grandson got in there to study politics, I was really chuffed about it. Anyway, he tells me this. SOAS send me career opportunities every week. This week, the first 3 options are for the army. Study at the School of Oriental and African Studies and go into the army. Why don't you? Professor George is on the line, and we're very glad to see him. Dr. George, thank you very much for joining us again on the Mother of All Talk Shows. Now, let me start where, fairly adjacent to where you are. There's some more trouble brewing in what they laughably call Kosovo. Tell us.
Well, if one thinks of the modern NATO, it came of age during the 1990s when it bombed first Bosnia-Herzegovina and then bombed Yugoslavia. And it was very pleased with itself, congratulated itself, and I'd say we found a new role for NATO, humanitarian intervention, creating states out of nothing. But as the years have gone by, NATO has looked back on its handiwork in the Balkans with a somewhat jaundiced eye because it hasn't really achieved what it wanted to achieve. The Bosnia and Herzegovina that came out from the Dayton Accords remains divided. There is this entity, the Republika Srpska, which is dominated by the Serbs of Bosnia and Herzegovina, who tend to look upon favorably on Russia. They share the church, they have a very similar language. And then when it comes to Yugoslavia, they badly wanted Serbia to recognize Kosovo and accept that they've lost Kosovo. Kosovo is an independent state, and then Kosovo can be marched into NATO, the EU, and all the rest. But that hasn't really worked out. So NATO really over the past 5-6 years had been very assiduously finding some way of rectifying these two deficiencies, which is to get rid of this Republika Srpska once and for all, get Serbia to recognize Kosovo, and above all, to get Serbia and the Bosnian Serbs on board for the anti-Russian, Russophobic policy of NATO and the EU. And so anytime you look for any of these problems, which is that, in Kosovo, it's being provoked by Albin Kurti, the Kosovo leader, with a view to provoking a NATO intervention. I mean, that's always what it does. If they can get another NATO intervention into Kosovo, it worked 25 years ago. They pushed the Serbs out. Maybe they can do it again just by saying, oh, the Serbs did this, Serbs did that. And of course, behind the Serbs stands big bad Putin. And in the meantime, the same thing is happening in Bosnia and Herzegovina, where the leader of the Republika Srpska, Milorad Dodik, could be arrested at any time. He's been threatened with arrest by the Office of the High Representative, somebody who's appointed by NATO to run the place. And he has threatened to arrest Milorad Dodik. And again, that could provoke a NATO intervention should the Serbs rebel at seeing their leader arrested. That could be the provocation for a NATO intervention. So NATO is looking for ways to rectify its problem, because the whole continent is now under NATO control. And there are only two holdouts, Serbia and the Republika Srpska in Bosnia and Herzegovina. There is, of course, Austria, and they are also trying to push Austria into NATO. But this problem with the Balkans is just not going to go away, and it's annoying NATO no end.
Although in Hungary, for example, the government is taking an increasingly independent line, independent of NATO and of the EU. In Poland, where there are elections now, you can't be elected unless you are taking a firm stand on issues like immigration, for example. This tremendous influx of Africans to Lampedusa in Italy, they plan on sprinkling these African people who've arrived there throughout all European countries. Poland saying not one of them will come here. Poland has effectively broken relations with Ukraine now. So actually there are real life forces which are pushing more and more European governments into a different political position, aren't there?
Well, we'll have to see whether that's the case. I mean, Poland, the Polish government has a very tough election fight on its hands. It's in 3 weeks' time. They are very worried about this new party, this Confederal Party, that could challenge them and therefore push them out of power and then bring in this Donald Tusk. So what are they doing? They're playing the Polish nationalist card and saying, we're not going to give anything to Ukraine. I would be very surprised if Poland will stick to that policy. I mean, Poland is now so identified with Russophobia, with leading the charge against Russia. I mean, Poland now sees itself as the leader of Europe. I mean, it's pushing aside Germany and France and saying, we are the leaders of Europe. We are America's closest ally. Look at how useless Germany has been. Look at how useless France has been. We were aware of Russia from the beginning. So one has to take this with a pinch of salt, what this whole row between Zelensky and Duda and Morawiecki. we'll see what happens after the election. Same with this Lampedusa. I mean, remember, Giorgia Meloni was supposed to be the Mussolini, the return of Mussolini, and that was it. Italy was going to join Hungary, and the whole NATO endeavor would collapse. And then she just collapsed. She was the one who just faded away. And now she's turned to Ursula von der Leyen and says, "Well, please help me with this immigration problem." Well, that was her defining issue. That was what got her into power. And now, under her rule, immigration has massively expanded. I mean, she's worse on this issue than her predecessor, Mario Draghi, the sort of the globalist in chief. So one has to wait and see where things fall out. The problem is the electorates of Europe are just not following the leaders, the political leaders. I mean, the political leaders, they love this whole Ukraine project. But that's not what the voters want. I mean, here is in Germany, when you have Annalena Baerbock, whose project, she's declared her project is to bring Putin to justice. That's it. That's going to be German foreign policy. That's the feminist German foreign policy, bringing Putin to justice. Quite how she plans to do this, she doesn't really spell out. She's also said she doesn't care what the German people think. I mean, she's just going to pursue whatever she thinks. And that's really the attitude of so many voters of so many leaders in Europe and also in the United States, which is that, well, we love this project, this Ukraine project. Unfortunately, the stupid voters are not with us.
As we know, you can love something too much. And what happened in the Canadian Parliament, which from what I can tell is now causing tremendous ructions in the country. It's what happens when you get carried away, George, isn't it? You construct this Manichaean narrative, and then you end up with a standing ovation to a Nazi murderer in the Eastern Holocaust. It's a remarkable business, isn't it?
It really is a remarkable business. So, there they were, they're all clapping this 98-year-old. Oh, what a wonderful old codger. He was this great guy, an old man of the old school, salt of the earth types. And then this was a Nazi. I mean, he was in this Galician division. He was trained in Germany. There are photographs of him in Germany. He was being trained in 1942 in Germany. So, and of course, Zelensky was applauding him. Zelensky knows exactly who he was. Of course, the Canadians, who took in a lot of these Ukrainian Nazis, pretending that they didn't know what was what. And remember, we have this Krista Friedman, who her grandfather was an active propagandist for the Nazis. When this came out, she immediately said, "Oh, this is Russian disinformation, again, Putin this, Putin that." Then, of course, it turned out that it was indeed a Nazi propagandist. And they said, "Well, I didn't know." This is all nonsense. All the Canadians knew exactly who they were taking in. Krista Friedland knew exactly who her grandfather was. But they pretend not to know, basically because they don't really care. I mean, they've adopted essentially the slogans of the 1930s. Anybody who hates the Russians is on our side. It doesn't matter, you're a fascist, you're a Nazi, you're genocidal, whatever. As long as you hate the Russians, you're on our side. And that's a nice kind of reversion to the attitudes of the 1930s and 40s.
We have a saying here, George: never ask a man his wage, a woman her age, or a Ukrainian what their grandfather did in the Second World War. That might have been what was at play in the Canadian Parliament this week.
Yes, well, exactly. But it is quite striking how all these things are quietly forgiven and forgotten. I mean, and it's not just Ukrainian. I mean, you talk about the Balts. The Balts commemorate every year the Nazi collaborators, and I said, okay, that's fine, no problem there. Then you have the Ukrainians. Okay, no problem there. You have countries in Eastern Europe that are desecrating World War II memorials. I mean, almost every day, yet they're taking down, yet another World War II memorial. Why are they taking down World War II memorials other than they want to, extirpate the history of liberation from the Red Army? That's why they're taking it down. So it has nothing to do with communism. Oh, because we don't like communism. Well, they're not taking down statues of Lenin. They're taking down World War II memorials. There were memorials to the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of soldiers from the Red Army who died liberating these countries, and they just want to take them down. And that's just it's their attitude shows that it's that Russophobia that it very much goes back to the Nazi ideology. Notice Hungary doesn't do that. Hungary has left all the World War II memorials intact. It's left all the World War II cemeteries intact. It's never done that. So you can see how certain countries, and the Hungarians, they have no love for the communists, but they always distinguish, communists from the Red Army, the people who actually came and sacrificed hundreds of thousands of lives liberating them.
Turning to the war then, Professor, I thought at first when I saw these bombs, British supplied cruise missiles raining down on the Navy HQ, the balloon is surely going to go up now. This is an inflection point in the war. But the balloon hasn't actually gone up. And indeed, some people say these kind of attacks are merely performative public relations shows to mask the fact that, as everyone who knows now knows and increasingly says, the Ukrainian counteroffensive is done. It's over. And all that remains to be seen is when the Russians will go on the offensive. Which way do you see it?
Well, I see it more that they want to inflict a humiliation on Russia. I think the NATO powers, and that means the United States, for them, this is a good boondoggle. They want to keep this war going. They want to kill as many Russians as possible, drain Russia as much as possible, debilitate Russia as much as possible, and to diminish Russia's claim to be a great power. Well, what better way of diminishing it than by attacking Russian territory? I mean, this missile attack, not only was it a UK missile, there was essentially, this was guided by the United States. There was a reconnaissance aircraft in the neighborhood. It was guiding. So it was essentially a US attack on Russian territory. And the US goes back and say, hey, we crossed another red line and nothing happened. And there's, in fact, an article in the New York Times with some US official, anonymous, saying, gloating, hey, we've crossed so many Russian red lines, we just don't pay any more attention to them. Because now the article was about the fact that US military hospitals are treating US mercenaries who were wounded in Ukraine. In other words, you're wounded in Ukraine, you're taken to a US Army hospital in Germany. So essentially, they're treating mercenaries as if they were US Army personnel. And people say, hey, well, is that a red line? I said, no, there have been so many red lines. But for them, it's a way to humiliate Russia. They think Russia is weak. They think Russia is afraid of NATO. They think they are afraid of us. We are not afraid of them. They are afraid of triggering a nuclear war. We are not afraid. And that's the NATO. I think it's a very dangerous way of thinking, a very reckless and dangerous way of thinking. But I think that's the way NATO is thinking. They think we can get away with anything because the Russians are afraid of us.
It's unlikely that the Russians are afraid of them, but it's also true that Russia has not appreciably struck back for what was, as you say, a very embarrassing, to say the least, attack on their naval HQ in Sebastopol.
Yep, that's right. Yeah, no, I think that's right. I also don't think the Russians are afraid. The Russians are very cautious. They've always been very cautious. Putin is a very cautious man. He doesn't want to start a world war. The problem is that if this continues, there is going to come a point when Russia just simply can't sit on its hands. And I don't know what that point will be, but they could come. I mean, maybe at some point the United States might say that, well, we can transfer some small nuclear battlefield weapons to Ukraine. They'll be very small, very, very small. And maybe that'll be the point. But it's clear that they keep NATO, the United States, they keep escalating. They keep moving, keep moving forward. And I think at some point this is going to end very badly.
Dr. George, as always, a voice of reason. Thank you for joining us on the Mother of All Talk Shows. Time is running, so let me take a quick break, and then it's your calls all the way to the end. Stay tuned. You don't get to call me far right. You don't get to call me that on my own show. A lifelong socialist, the leader of a socialist party, the Workers' Party of Britain, with an Indonesian wife, with 5 mixed-race children, with a record of fighting racism all of my life, representing more people of colour in the British Parliament than anyone in history by a country mile. You don't get to call me far right. These kind of idiotic insults tossed around by infantile leftists who think that anyone to the right of them is a fascist, is a racist. They are the cause of the crashing and burning of what used to be called the left. They are the cause of it. They have discredited leftism with their foolish, idiotic isms and ists and smears that emanate from them like a bad smell.
You are listening to the Mother of All Talk Shows with George Galloway.
An email from Mark. Dear George, I've just emailed Michelle Rempel-Garner MP in Canada for an explanation of this horrendous standing ovation. Kind regards, Mark Brunson. Thank you, Mark. The Simon Wiesenthal Center, very important and prominent Jewish institution, has equally now asked the Canadians for an explanation for this atrocity. But Rudy in Montreal supports Trudeau, so we better hear from him. You sure, Rudy?
I'm absolutely sure, and I'm not against you, and I'm not against Russia, because I admire Putin. He's doing what nor an intelligent person would do. The fact of the matter, the problem is Britain. Britain was the one that got involved with World War I. They should have kept out of it. They caused the damage in Germany, and there was a massive depression there. And the fact is that the Americans are also involved in this nonsense. They created a worldwide depression and were selling their children to any taker. This depression was massive, and this is why so many people had no other choice. They had to go to war. There was nothing going on. There was a massive depression. If it wasn't for the depression, I don't know what would have happened. And thank God for Neville Chamberlain. If they listened to him, Britain would have remained out of the war, and they could have taken all the Jewish people who were refugees from they could have done that for the humanity, but no, they had to be leaders. They had to destroy Germany in the First World War because they were competitors. So the whole situation is not just one section. The other thing is this Guaido. They made him a hero in the United States. Let's
stay on the subject Are you a Nazi sympathizer, Rudy?
Not at all. Never. I don't agree with that.
But you're blaming Britain for the Second World War rather than Adolf Hitler. So for you, Hitler could have taken all of Europe, and Britain could have rescued the Jews that he was otherwise going to murder. Is that a summary of what you said?
I don't think so. The Russians stood up for themselves. Countries could stand up for themselves. They wouldn't.
No, I'm talking about Hitler. I'm trying to get your views on Hitler. I'm trying to get your views on
I don't know
Hitler.
Hitler. I never met him. And the fact is, why do all the Americans bring in all the Nazis in Germany? It's why. They're heroes in the United States.
Well, I don't know Hitler either, and I never met him. But I know that he committed a Holocaust in Western Europe and in Eastern Europe, although the latter is less well known. And in your country, one of the criminals who carried out that Holocaust in the East, this very week, was received with a standing ovation by your members of Parliament, led by your Prime Minister, High-Heeled Jack Trudeau. And I'm trying to get your view on that.
Look, it's water off the back of a duck. What's going to... Nobody...
Really?
I never heard of this guy, this Nazi. I never heard of him. The ordinary people...
But you saw your MPs gave him a standing ovation in your Parliament. And you are strangely untroubled by it.
I am untroubled by it. So it's one couple of hours out of an entire year. With the work that Trudeau has done for Canada.
Don't you think that the survivors of the 1 million Canadians who fought Hitler, the descendants, I mean, of the 1 million Canadians who fought Hitler, the descendants of the 100,000 of those who gave their lives and limbs fighting Hitler, do you think it's water off a duck's back for them?
Not at all. Not at all. I sympathize with them, but there's nothing I can do. Hitler's dead. They're all dead. They can't do anything about
Trudeau
it. I
isn't
can't bring
dead.
back the past.
Trudeau isn't dead, but he led the ovation for one of Hitler's murderers this week. I want you to condemn Trudeau for doing that.
I condemn him for doing that. But that doesn't mean he's an evil person. People do things that they're ashamed of later on. We're human beings. We all make decisions sometimes that are stupid.
Well, at least we've agreed that it was a decision that was stupid. Whether it turns out to be water off a duck's back or just 2 hours in a year, perhaps we'll see in coming days in Canadian politics. Rudy, thanks for having the courage to call up for High-Heeled Jack. I doubt he would have done it for you. YouTube comments on the poll. Grapentine says the vote for either Elon Musk, Zuckerberg and Bill Gates is like a vote for Trump and Jim Crow Joe. I'll pass for a serving of revolution instead. On you go on yourself. Mandy says, I can't vote for any of these three either. The difference between Satan, Beelzebub or the devil. And Robert Stewart said it would make great reality TV. Elon, Zuckerberg and Bill. Would we need challenges? And Max Capone, who sends a very kind donation to the show of $19.99, said, I would vote for dead Teddy Roosevelt as a write-in candidate before any of these three. or instead of Joe Biden, well, there's day walking to run again. I'm not going to read that next word. Tony is in Canada, in BC, British Columbia, on about Nazis. Let's hear from Tony. On you go, Tony.
Oh, thanks, George. Thanks for having me on. First-time caller here. Yeah,
welcome.
I just want to say, as growing up as a Ukrainian Canadian in Canada, I was made really aware by my on my father's side, by my father and mother, that a lot of these Ukrainian immigrants, especially the ones that came after World War II, were actually Nazis or Nazi collaborators, and I really learned to sort of distrust or sort of be very careful when we're talking about Ukrainian ethnicity around them. But now it's really come out in the open. I think Trudeau has really exposed himself and all liberals as Nazi sympathizers. Now, my wife's uncle fought in World War II, and he was killed by Nazis, and so she's got really, tough, hard feelings about this. What else? Oh, yeah. So I saw the video of all the parliamentarians giving a standing ovation to this person who really should have been tried after World War II. Now he hung out for how many years, and now he's out in the open. I was disgusted. The party that I even worked for, the NDP, they called themselves socialists before. I guess they're all standing. And so I emailed my member of parliament and said, I hope you weren't standing for this, but I'm afraid he probably was. So that just shows how far things have gone downhill.
Well, they all were, Tony. Yeah, exactly. Well, what it is, Tony, is mass hysteria, in which the media and the political class feed each other the Kool-Aid, which works them further and further, higher and higher into this state of hysteria. Because, look, not everybody in the Canadian Parliament can be evil. I'm presuming there's one or two, but they all stood. Now, as soon as the Speaker said he fought the Russians in World War II, even if you were 19 and a student somewhere, that would ring a bell in your head. Anybody that fought the Russians in World War II was fighting for Hitler. But none of them appear to have realized this and slowly, quietly got back into their seat. Last word to you, Tony.
Well, okay, but on X I saw a tweet by Max Blumenthal, and he had mentioned, I don't know if you remember John Demaniuk, who's called Ivan the Terrible. There was a thing about 20, 30 years ago, big deal about he was a guard or something, and I think he got deported. Well, he said that if the devil next door. They could have brought him out, and they'd be celebrating him.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
All that was missing, Tony, all that was missing was the guy suddenly Sieg Heiling and throwing Hitler salutes and singing Winter with Hitler in Canada. That's all that was missing from the scene. And how can anyone defend it? If Demjanjuk had been there, why would you not give him a standing ovation? He also fought Russians in World War II as an SS guard, complicit in the mass murder of Jews and others in the Holocaust. Why would you not give him a standing ovation? What's the difference between him and Yaroslav Junk? No difference at all. They played exactly the same role in the Second World War. Demjanjuk? Why not Hitler himself? If Hitler really did escape and he's still alive, It's probably safe to come out, Adolf. They'll carpet a welcome for you in Canada, at least. Email from Enrique. Hello, George. I thought with all that clapping that SEALs had laid siege in the Canadian Parliament. They obviously didn't do their homework or background check on who he was. Absolutely disgraceful and embarrassing. But that just sums up the Trudeau government. Great show. Thank you, Enrique. But they did check him. The Speaker gave his bio. He thanked him, and I'm directly quoting, for all his service. All his service? As a member of the SS? You thanked him for all his service? You, the Speaker of the Canadian Parliament, told your parliamentary colleagues that they should applaud this man because he had fought Russians in World War II. So they did know, Enrique. At least the people that run the Parliament knew. The Speaker knew. High-heeled Jack Trudeau knew. And this from Big Al, another great show, GG. All of America needs to hear you. You're a voice of truthfulness in the wilderness of the destroyers here in America. Would you come to Fort Lauderdale and South Florida and speak? We'll arrange for you. Big Al Chicote on Android. Thanks, Al. I doubt I'd be safe in the panhandle. Okay, the poll results. It's now closed. 17,581 people voted. And I'm afraid it was a landslide victory for Elon Musk. And Mark Zuckerberg and Bill Gates have been utterly, completely humiliated. You'd need to have a heart of stone not to laugh. Well, we're getting near the end, but a legend is on the line. It's the legend that is Norma in Bristol. Norma, God bless you. Everyone's thinking of you. Welcome to the show.
George, I think you do need a few more women callers because there aren't enough, are there? But the main thing I was going to say was...
I should have asked for that because it is noticeable. You're the only woman caller of the evening.
Yeah.
I don't know why they don't call. Maybe they're afraid of me. Maybe my voice is too loud or I'm too rough or whatever. I don't know. What do you think it is?
I'm not frightened of you. I'm not frightened of you. You're so nice to me. Even if I disagree with you. But the thing is, I thought, honestly, tonight, and it's been going on for the whole show, more or less, that monologue was truly good. I mean, you just told it as it should be. And it was, amazing, the ignorance of that Canadian government. And watching them clapping, they were like a load of sheep, weren't they? I just wanted to say that I learned such a lot, because I don't know all the... I'd seen this thing on Twitter, but I don't know all the ins and outs, and you tell us things that we learn. And really...
I'm grateful. I'm grateful for that. But in the time available to me, Norma, I want to tell you that there are many people who watch the show who are concerned about you and your near-time future and want to help you. So I want you to think about how we can help you and let us know how we can help you, because we want to.
George.
It's not about charity or whatever. You are our friend and we want to help you. So think about what it is that you need, what help you need. Will you do that for me?
Well, I will, George, but I'm trying to work out my future anyway. And listening to you, and thank you very much, this diversion of your show, it just forgets the sad situation here at home, because my husband's still waiting for palliative doctors to organise his end-of-life care plan. And I don't know if I have to pay for that or if the government pay. I don't know whether my incomings are going to match my outgoings. But I've been doing a lot of work on trying to make sure that I can make ends meet. And I probably will. It's just one thing after another that adds to the stress. And that's why I like your program.
What a wonderful call, and very good note on which to end from the legend Norma in Bristol. I think it's been a high-powered, high-octane show, and deservedly so, with two great guests that you wouldn't find on MSNBC or BBC or any of the mainstream media channels in the United States, in North America, or anywhere in Europe. And that is important. That means we're playing an important role because we are giving voice to people with important things to say and with important experience and qualifications from which to say them. We are providing that. And you, this enormous audience and growing audience, again, now as we come to the end of the summer holiday period, you, the audience, are playing an important role, not just because you've turned up to watch it, but because you obviously are, as I frequently ask you to do, telling people of the existence of the show, the quality of the guests, maybe, if I'm not immodest, the quality of the monologues, and so on. You're telling people, and they're coming. If you build it, they will come, as someone famously once said in a Hollywood movie. Hollywood's still on strike, and we haven't begun to miss it yet, isn't it? Funny. Well, I'll be back again, God willing, at the slightly later time of 9 p.m. on Wednesday for the midweek mother of all talk shows. We're still working hard on the possibility of a trial run, 6 weeks, maybe 8 weeks, of a MOATS Africa, which we would very much like to do in association with a group called African Stream, who put out some really terrific stuff. If you haven't followed them yet, we've actually got a clip from them. Why don't we finish on this clip from African Stream, which may be a sign of things to come. Some coups are approved by Western countries, some entirely disapproved. One thing I think is very clear, that the writing on the wall about France and its venal and malign role in Africa is very large. The writing is unmistakable. France's time as an exploitative colonial power in Africa is rapidly coming to an end. Ali Bongo was given the gift for his 64th birthday in entirely fraudulent 64% of the vote in a rigged, indeed fantastically, absurdly rigged, a general election. He will never be back. The Bongos will fall silent. The question is to make sure that a popular government emerges, whether military or otherwise, a government that will act in the interests of the people, that will use the resources that God gave them to make prosperous the people, both in the private and public sphere, and will act with wisdom vis-a-vis its neighbors, first of all in West Africa, and later, I pray, in the continent of Africa as a whole. Follow them, please, African Stream. I very much hope that if we can get this MOATS Africa off the ground, that we will be able to do it in association with African Stream. As I was saying, I'll be back, God willing, on Wednesday at the later time of 9 p.m. UK. Always check times. I never know when the clocks are changing. 9 p.m. UK time on Wednesday. I hope to see you again there for the Mother of All Talk Shows. Good night.